We are continuing on our theme of the moving through the angel and the voyager, and looking at that Thomas Cole's Voyage of Life and how those paintings, what do they tell us about the meaning of life? And I came to love his work, as I told you before, when I went to the National Gallery of Art in 2018 in July, and then we did a series here. So it's funny how these things end. One thing leads to another, and leads to a book. And there are 4 chapters in this book. And last time we were together, we looked at chapter 2, and it has to do with memento mori, the cycles of life. Remember, you're going to die is what memento mori means, and these dance of death and so forth, and all the. So I love to use different aspects of things of art and even this anamorphic art. And we did this last time together before, and we were talking a bit about music and about poetry, and how there are 3 major approaches in poetry. One is to resign to futility in view of the awful nature of the brevity of the earthbound sojourn. The other one, though, is to suppose perhaps there's a way I can attain immortality through my art, but it's a failed quest. And then the third approach, which I ended with last time, was hope in eternity. And something happened where I had this page open like this, and I said, then it jumped to here, where am I? And I forgot that it's there. So I didn't show you this last time. And this was the John Donne and also George Herbert are 2 great exemplars of how they look at death in an entirely different way. As I put it here, it defines our life's purpose not by the pain of our bounded past, but by the joy of our unbounded future. And that is really how you're defined, not by the pain of the past, but by the joy of the future. And God even leverages what he allows in our lives. He redeems what he allows, as you know, and this is a major theme. And so we've talked about this before. It's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy. Age, what does it do? Conspires with God to take away, to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. It's a if we stayed 20 years old the rest of our lives and never aged, who would want heaven? You see, it's designed to drive us to the realization that we are pilgrims and sojourners. And so in this marvelous poem, then, when he says, "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death. Nor yet canst thou kill me." And then he uses this imagery of rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be. Much pleasure. We get pleasure from that. And he says as well that soonest our best men with thee do go. But where do they go? Rest of their bones and souls' deliveries. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. And death with poison, war, and sickness dwell. And poppy and charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. And that's what I was looking for last time. I wasn't able to show you, and I really wanted to bring that out because it's a completion, it's a closure, it's a way of seeing that these cycles of birth and of growth and of decay and of death, which Thomas Cole did something in art that had not really been done to that degree of turning into an allegory of these 4 dynamics in these great paintings, the Voyage of Life. But we decided to do something that I had not seen done before, and in chapter 3, it's to compare the Voyage of Life series of paintings with the Course of Empire series of paintings. Because it turns out over 10 years, he did then 2 sets, as you know, of the Voyage of Life. And the one that he did in Europe is the one that's now at the National Gallery of Art. And that's the one that I saw, and I was so amazed by it because it's clearly an allegory. But the way he uses it and so beautifully crafts a picture of what we're looking at in terms of childhood, of youth, of manhood and old age. But then as well, I've not seen this done, but I think it's nice to see. Let's take a look at this Course of Empire, because there too you see the same stages. The first 2, the savage state and the Arcadian state, correspond to our childhood. You see, it's like a national level. So what you're now looking at is not just an individual, but you're looking at a nation. Indeed, he's speaking about America in its adolescence, you see. And he's speaking about that's where we were in the 19th century. So he's painting these things then. And as you know, he died in 1842. And so he only lived a very short life. And as a consequence, he didn't accomplish all that he wanted to achieve. But in these five paintings, the first two do correspond to kind of like a childhood in a nation or an empire. Because as you know, birth, growth, decay, death, that cycle. And that can be true of a civilization. It can be true of a nation. More specifically, it can be true of an individual, as we well know. It's also true of a year. And so that's all in the annual cycle. And then remember as well, it's true of a day, because every day has its birth, its growth, decay, and death. And so seeing it this way then helps us to see these parallels. And so then he looks at the consummation and then the destruction of empire. So I want to just take you through these themes. Much to do in a short time, so I will be very quick about this. But I'm just giving you the big picture about this painting of childhood. So the parallel then is here. As we look at this wonderful painting, and Cole describes the journey and describes it in these terms. He says, the stream is issuing from a deep cavern. And he speaks about the figures of the hours that are on the side of the boat. And so if we take a look at these here, we look, and there's this deep cavern out of which they emerge, the chaos, you see. It's almost coming out of the womb or something, like an image of that darkness. And it's a very narrow river at first, and everything's ordered. And the child who is playing and filled with beauty and surrounded by beauty, his angel is guiding him and has the hand on the rudder. And you see the hourglass as well. So let me just get you a little image here so we can see where we are. So here's the hourglass, you see? And that hourglass is the number of years and days he's been appointed. And these are the figures of the hours as well. And so the angel has the rudder, and the child is just delighted and sees this great beauty surrounded by it. And it's an immensity. And even here, the fact that you have the lotus, which is a symbol of life in the foreground, the fecundity, the beauty, but also it's kind of narrow and controlled, is also, you notice, he deliberately has it such that the clouds cover up the top of the mountain. So there's obscurity. You're not entirely clear. You're in an immense world that is beyond your imagination. But the beauty and the lushness, and it's a time of joy and delight in the beauty of the natural world. Whereas in the savage state, then, by comparison, he does the same thing in this painting. And all these paintings in this 5-part series on the course of empire always have this boulder at the top, you see. And it's a sign and a symbol in all 5 paintings. There's a stability about that because it endures, and yet it's fragility. You see, it's perched. And it's a kind of a dual symbol, isn't it, about the whole idea of what's going on. And in this pristine or savage state, now, James Fenimore Cooper and Thomas Cole loved each other's work. And so he picks up from the last of the Mohegans. And so you see the Indian here. And it's a pristine, generally wonderful state where things are ordered and nature is respected, and there is a natural beauty. Even here you have there's some canoes and so forth. But there's a kind of like a balance where it's a world in which it is allowing that, and there's a balance and there's a respect for that natural world, which then begins to take place in the Akkadian or pastoral state, begins to be changed. Because here, this also represents the youth of a civilization. But you'll notice now, there's fields. So there are areas that are being plowed as well. So you see the plowing, and we actually use this imagery here. See if I can find it for you here. Yes, so we are talking about, here is the image here, and the boat. So in our book, we're talking about the nature of this as well, so that make sure we've got this here. Yeah. So in this Arcadian situation here, you have the beginnings of architecture here and of religion, and as well you have the idea of shepherding You have over here the beginning of philosophy, where it's almost a sage is writing in the sand. You see, so there's something going on. There's a growth. There's a movement toward toward accomplishments. And here is art, as it's symbolized here as this boy. And Thomas Cole's name is right under here. So it's hard to see it, but he actually writes his name under here as well. And then you see other features as well. But also you'll notice something here. What are you seeing? You see, it's hard to see, isn't it? But that's a tree stump. It's a sign of things to come. So it's something that's really now, it's good, but it's quite what it was. And there you have that boulder in the top once again. And so these paintings then illustrate a kind of a process. When we go into youth then, as we see, there's more of an idea of occasion for fame, for reputation, seeking the bubble reputation. And this idea of youth then is beautifully portrayed in his imagery here of how the angel, which he did not see at first and he still does not see, is bidding him adieu, but he now has the rudder. See, and now he's got big visions of what his life can be like as he looks at this. And what is he beholding up in front of him? He's looking up ahead in this direction here. And if you look up there and go beyond, what do you see? These cloud-capped towers, these gorgeous palaces. And Cole himself describes it in these terms. Let's see if I can find that for you here, where Cole describes the process of youth here. And just find you the right part here. Yeah, as he in his own description of his paintings, which were intriguing, he says, the scenery in this picture is its clear stream, its lofty trees, its towering mountains, its unbounded distance, and transparent atmosphere figures forth the romantic beauty of youthful imagining. So this is the artist's own commentary on what he's saying. And he speaks about how when the mind magnifies the mean and common into the magnificent before experience teaches us what is the real. It's interesting. It's like William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. As you move, you see the world from the eyes of a child, but then you see them with maturity, and it's a different vision. And so he himself writes the gorgeous cloud-built palace. And I could not help then, when I thought of that, to think about Prospero, this is at the end of Shakespeare's career. And it's almost as if Prospero in the Tempest speaks as if it were Shakespeare speaking to the audience himself and says, our revels now are ended. And so he's looking at the brevity of this earthbound journey. What was it about? These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. This idea, which is where we get that phrase from. And he says, like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherits shall dissolve. And like this substantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little lives are rounded with a sleep. So it's a picture of that brevity of the earthbound sojourn. It's in a remarkable picture then. So the gorgeous palaces, they're all there. But the interesting thing, when you really take this painting apart and take a look at what he's seeing here, these are his aspirations. And indeed, if you magnify it, you can see there is a kind of a pathway that works its way up there. It seems to be heading that direction. And so he's got his hand on the rudder. And there's his hourglass. And then these are the figures of the hours, symbolically represented on his boat. And he is being sent off. And the river is wider now than it had been. And it's going to get wider as it goes. So he has these wonderful visions of that, the vision of his own imaginings and his own achievements and his own world in front of him. What he fails, however, to see is something that is going to be manifested in the next one. And that is, if you take a close enough look, you realize that he's on this river and he can't get off the river. And so it's going to continue down here, but you'll notice it takes a sharp turn to the right. This is not part of what his plan was. And then there you see the river again. continuing there, and then continuing again. There's the river, and there it gets roiling and dangerous, and it's leading off to a place he does not want to go. So what he saw were his dreams of this are going to be defeated by the reality of life. That's the metaphorical image. Again, lush and verdant and beautiful, filled with possibility and opportunity that he sees. But it will not be as he imagines, because you see he's not in control, never has been. So that control and all these youthful imaginings are but artifacts of the illusions of our brief earthbound sojourns. So then the consummation of empire, another painting, the next stage along. So by comparison, you have the empire now has completely changed. This reaches us to the point of earthly achievement. And what's happened to nature? It's almost been completely gone and replaced by the artifacts of humanity. Here is a man riding on an elephant. This leader going into this Protean palace here, it's one temple upon another temple, and then you see Minerva and the goddess of power and of war and of victory, an achievement of great things. And that's where that is. What are you looking at there? The same rock that was in those other paintings. So he shows that those things endure and these do not. So what you have are extraordinary images. In fact, here's Thomas Cole's own signature, 1836. So he actually marks that as well. But you see all these splendid images, but also replacement with potted plants, you see, and artifacts of our own imagination and making that are not nearly as wonderful and rich as the natural realm would be, but our hubris and our undaunted pursuit of excellence or greatness or wonder, but it's something that we try to achieve, and it actually diminishes nature itself. We move on to manhood, and we see now in this imagery here, it's only when experience has taught us the realities of the world that we lift from our eyes the golden veil of early life, that we feel deep and abiding sorrow, you see. So before that, we had trouble, is now the characteristic of manhood, you see. He's moved away from the wonders of that life that was protected and guided in childhood into the youthful imaginings of what life could be like. But then when he gets into manhood, reality sets upon him, and he sees then this is not really what he intended at all, because now he's in that place where it's gone off to the right. And you'll notice now in this portion of his life, he's in this roiling condition, and nature itself has been vastly diminished. You see as well, the almost no life left. And he sees for the first time, behind this mist, he sees the ocean of death. So for the first time, he can actually see the thing. As a friend of mine once put it, he said, "You know that the grave is on the other side. You know, you get over the top. We say I'm over the top. But when you get over the top and you're able to see it for the first time, that's a different experience. You see, it's theoretical. Now it's real. I can see the darn thing, the grave. And so here he's also. And what is he doing? You'll notice that the hours are still there, but his hours are diminished. He has no rudder. He can't control the boat. And so everything is diminished as well in terms of the physicality and the experience. He's in great danger. And there is, for the third time, we see the angel. But again, he does not see the angel beholds him. He still has not yet seen that guiding spirit, as it were, that Cole is talking about there. So again, isn't this a metaphor of this earthbound journey? And then by the same token, he sees destruction. And so he now sees in the course of empire, what do you see has become of these temples? Now that bridge that carried the emperor over on an elephant has been broken up. The images of warfare is upon us. A woman who is choosing to plummet to her death rather than be ravished by this soldier. You see in all the things that are going on, that there is a diminishment and a loss and really a picture of sorrow and of death that prevails. There's Cole's name right there again, you see, 1836. He did this when he was in Europe. So what you see here is this desire to have something that's meaningful, but it's actually destruction has come upon us, and there it is. Once again, there's that little boulder. That stays. But our conditions continue to diminish. So these broken temples are now upon us. So it's that picture again of that desolation. So then this idea of the voyage of life, and then we get to old age itself, and the wondering scenes that are seeing now things he's never seen before, because now in this sequence, now as an old man, what do you behold now about his boat? There's no more hourglass, is there? Out of time, time's out. He has, of course, he's long lost his rudder. Even the figures of the hours are gone. He's in complete condition where he has nothing left. He sees now the ocean of death right there, and he beholds it. And for the first time, he beholds the angel as well. You see? And so the angel is showing him something that's beyond anything that earthbound felicity, anything he's ever seen in this world, and points him to something. And as you zoom up here, you see others are there waiting to welcome him, and the hosts of heaven. They continue up all the way up here. And so this idea of an image, a symbol of something that could be, and that he chooses either despair or he chooses hope. But the hope cannot be something based upon anything in this earthbound existence. It has to be something that's more robust, more rich, more profound. So life and fertility have been replaced by death and decay. The hourglass glass is gone, and it's a visual sermon, you might say. So this is what Cole is seeking to do, is to remind us of the earthbound situation that we're all in. Remember these 6 metaphors for this earthbound experience, that you are a pilgrim, you're a sojourner, you're an alien, you're an exile, you're a stranger, you're a wayfarer, and you're on this journey, this pilgrim's journey. And so, as I've often shown you, this Eternal Perspective collection of rewriting your broken story is our past, this is our present, and this is our future. And from a biblical standpoint, it's a far more robust narrative than an earthbound condition, because it gives us answers and tells us that you are, in fact, an amphibious being. You have one foot in heaven and the other is on earth. And as such, therefore, you are a spiritual being having this earthbound experience. And that's why you long for anything more than this world could ever possibly hope to sustain. You want more than the world could ever provide, because you are meant for more. You've made us for yourself, our Lord, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you. So in rewriting your broken story, as I like to put it, and some of you, I think, have read that, but it's about the whole idea that every one of you in this room is in a broken story, because we're in a fallen world. And things are not as we would want them to be. And nevertheless, though, the way we take a broken story and fix it is by putting our little story into the greatest story ever told, which has 4 acts, not just the fall and redemption, but more cosmic in its scope, creation and the new creation. So it's cosmic in its scope, and it's a divine comedy, because it began well and it'll end well. But you are, again, leaving the earthbound city, as it were, and the heavens image in the top and earth below. And so we're on this pathway. We're moving along this way here, and it continues here. And even now, we can't see above the canopy of the leaves, but there is a light that sometimes radiates our pathway. And those patches of God light then illuminate the path. And so our job and our task is to practice His presence and to prepare for our eternal citizenship in His presence and our eternal journey. So we walk in the present. And I wanted to make sure that they continued like this. So it goes like this, and even goes all the way up to the heavenly places. So there's a definite method to this madness here with these covers. And so this is going to be it's going to be in a slipcase. And so, again, you see the pathway is illuminated here, and it goes that way. So it's going to be in a nice slipcase as well. And I mentioned this because my biggest theme, I guess, if I had to choose one theme more than any other theme, would be, I think, the idea of us being sojourners who need to have an eternal perspective in a temporal arena. And that's really the concept that we have. Without an eternal perspective, I would despair. At this point in my life, I would be in heavy need of some kind of medication or something to delude myself, because life would then seem to be meaningless and absurd if there's life without the life on the other side of the grave, you see. If a man dies, will he live again, is what Job asks, because this is what the question is. If you are an eternal being, then what means that you are in this world and you're being shaped by suffering, and it's preparing you for your eternal citizenship. And the suffering is necessary to conform us into the image of God's Son, who in fact pursued us, wooed us, and called us, the sacred romancer of our souls. And this is why I say that Christianity is not a religion. I used to say it's a relationship, and that's true, it's a relationship. But now I say Christianity is not a religion, it's a romance. It's a romance. It's a great romance where God is the one, Jesus is the one who woos us and pursues us, and he is the one who pursues his beloved and his bride and wants us to be with him. So even in this own journey, as we see these phases of our own life, and this again could be a day. You woke up, you reached your point of maximum capacity. Then you get weary, and then you finally go to your burial chamber tonight. So every day is like an illustration of what this is like. So we see how God's desire, as he takes us through this sequence of life and gives us a realistic perspective, invites us to see that we are really heading for something richer and more wonderful and more abundant than what we could ever imagine here. So continuing on, this again, we have the desolation, the awful desolation, and it's on a cycle. If you compare the five paintings in the course of Empire, you'll see that the first one is done with. Let me just show them to you together, so you can see. It's in the sunrise. You see, so look at the light now. And so in the savage state and then the Arcadian state, as the sun is getting higher, and then it reaches its zenith, you see, and then it begins to diminish, and finally there's the moon. And so you see it's a loss. And while this survives, now what's happening? Birds are building their nests in pillars that used to hold a temple. And nature is beginning to take over. And it would be very much so when he visited Europe during that one period of time, and where he painted these things, that you'd look at these artifacts of men. And there's a kind of a poignant beauty to that when you see these ruins and ancient ruins that are actually quite intriguing, you see, because you go to these places like Tintern Abbey and other places, and there's something very romantic and so forth, but nature is really reclaiming, which is as one might expect it should be. So in going back to that, so we see these images here of the earthbound sojourn, and we see, what is this all meant to be about? What are we supposed to see? That as we see that the earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but they're superseded by the kingdom of God. And again, our own futility and our vanity and our eagerness to accomplish something. But the problem is we just weave but nets to catch the wind. You know, it's not enough. And the nations made an uproar, and the kingdoms tottered, and he raised his voice, and the earth melted. So in our lives, we know that the ultimate source of constancy and dominance is not material riches or the natural world. It's one true and unchanging God. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and all the world, even from everlasting you are. So how can then we know who and whose we are? We can only find ourselves when we find the one who made us. And the one who made us is not just some kind of a force or some kind of impersonal all that is, or that we're not being absorbed into the cosmic whole, but rather it's the incredible concept that each of us matters. and that we as individuals matter. But it's not individualistic, on the other hand. And the other side is that we're not part of just a collectivism on the other, where we have both. And it's all bound by the imagery of the divine Trinity and the whole tripersonal entity, being that we call God. So that there's the lover and the beloved, and then there's a love that flows between them, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then we see this analogy as well, that he, because there has to be more than one person for there to be love, now invites us into the heart of all things by giving us entry into the presence of the living God. And he says, you in me and I in you. So this incredible combination of how we are called to know him and become like him. And so this chapter then focuses on this whole process of the loss and diminishment, but that actually beyond it is something you can't even begin to imagine. That that's where the story really continues. So in chapter 4, next week, when we conclude this book, we're going to be looking at the ocean of eternity. So we're going to be seeing those 4 images here, but from another point of view. Here's the problem, you see. You're on the road. You can't get off the stream. This life is so you can't get out of the boat. The boat continues to move on in that metaphorical image. And so as we see the fecundity and the beauty and the possibility of what might be, and then our own imaginations take rule, then reality sets in, and we are forced then to see things from another vantage point. And that's what draws us then to himself, or we can choose to decline his offer. And that's the awful part. Remember the idea that there are 2 kinds of people in the end, those who seek to know God and those who seek to avoid God. And both will succeed in the end. You can be a successful rebel to the very end. And that's why I think Lewis is so brilliant when he speaks about the gates of hell are locked from the inside, you see, because a person, he doesn't send you there. We choose not to know him, because a person who doesn't want to know God, suppose you've been trying to avoid him for 70 years in this world. You think you're going to enjoy his presence? You are training yourself and you're becoming a certain kind of person. You have no choice. And so you're going to either become more and more a person that he wants you to be, or you're going to diminish and lose that vitality. Read The Great Divorce is a great metaphor, because the concept here is that he invites us and he woos us and calls us, but we have to choose, because what's a relationship with a robot, an automaton? There's a whole idea, the awful gift of the freedom of choice, where we respond to God's loving overtures. And so all of us have been given grace, far more than our merit. All of us have been given a life and one who pursued us and who defined us and gave us an understanding of why we're here, who we are, and where we're going. And that's where the scriptures embed us in a narrative, a story, the greatest story ever told. A story that began well, and then, in spite of the fact that there was the fall brings out something like a great romantic story. Whether a film or a novel or a play, in which, for example, like Much Ado About Nothing or Twelfth Night or the Midsummer Night's Dream, that the characters have to go through a character arc, and there will always be adversity that's part of that arc, because without conflict, there's no story. You need to have conflict, and conflict then creates the interest in the story. Karen and I right now are going through the films of Alfred Hitchcock. I do these little sequences, and we're doing it in chronological order. So it's fascinating just to work through his works and see what that looks like. But every one of them has to have conflict. Because how much fun would it be if you see, let's say everyone starts off well, they're happy, and then in the middle of the story, they're still happy, and then at the end, they're happy family. That's nice, but it's bland. See, you need something. The conflict is the stuff, but it's also the stuff that forces the protagonist to move from the idea of what he wants and to discover through pain what he really needed. And it's through adversity that we actually discover our true identity. And so, and when we share the fellowship of Christ's sufferings and the being conformed to his death, that's a process that God graciously uses in order to draw us to himself. And that to me is a powerful picture, the glory of the living God and what that's going to be like. Now, by the way, in heaven then, will there be conflict in heaven? Because if there's no conflict, there's no story. Have you ever thought about that? So I chewed on this a long time. And this is of my own invention. I invent a lot of things. I pluck a lot of exotic flowers from my hermeneutical garden. And so this is one of them, where I now contrast two kinds of conflict. There's conflict, EU. Euthos means good. So, and versus so it's disconflictual and euconflictual. EU versus DYS. Most of what we think about as conflict is disconflictual, but there actually are needs for good conflict. And your whole body is full of this. Homeostasis is an example of that. That's why, for example, the electrolytes, you need to have a certain amount of potassium and a certain amount of sodium, and and probably 100 times or more a day, the body is constantly modifying those two. Because it's euconflictual because they're both goods. You see the idea there? They're not negatives. And you need them both, but there's this wonderful interplace where there's a constant movement back and forth. And if that conflict stops, you're dead. You see, so you need that in nature. So I see that as well in heaven, that the wonder will be that we will always be interacting and modifying and hearing each other's perspective and seeing this wonderful picture of world through the eyes of other people as well. The story will go on, and it'll go beyond they lived happily ever after. It'll actually be something that gives us, even in that unity, that's where it really begins. The story goes beyond there. And we don't have the imagination or the capacity to see it. But I see that in the euconflictual array of heaven, that all your capacities and my capacities will reinforce and play with each other, you see. So there will always be a delightful interaction and interface. So I don't see heaven as a drab, boring idea at all. But I see it as something that's rich and inviting. Gary Larson's cartoon, remember I've shown it before. I'm the only person who probably visually basically exegetes Larson cartoons. But the idea of a guy on a cloud, and he's got his wings, he's got his halo, he's got his harp. And he says, and this is the important thing, he says, are there any magazines here? Because stop and think about it. Most people's idea of heaven is a crashing bore. I would have no interest in it. No, it's so beyond that. And so cultivating an appetite for home and seeing that in this symbolic image, this angel is now inviting him to something richer and more robust than that, something much more wonderful that he can't even begin to imagine, hasn't seen or heard. Or has entered into the heart of things, the things that God's prepared for those who love him. The fact is that now we see through glass darkly, but then face to face. And then we will know as we are known, and then new things will approach, and that's where the story really begins. And it's a story no one's yet read on earth, but it's a story, as C.S. Lewis says at the end of the Chronicles of Narnia, in which every chapter gets better than the one before. So the story hasn't hardly even begun. So I claim then that in spite of the minimization and the diminishment of this earthbound existence, and we all experience it, the reality is that God gives us grace and invites us to transfer our affections from what is here and passing to that which is actually going to endure. And that's why, as you know, whenever I speak at a funeral, I speak of death as the second birth canal. The first birth canal gave you physical life. The second birth canal enters you and ushers you into the presence of the living God. It's not death. We're in the land of the dying. And so we're going to the land of the living. And that's why my desire, my aspiration for home, he symbolizes this with angels, but it's beyond our comprehension. We can't know. The glory, the radiance, the effulgence, the majesty and the wonder, the awe, all things, and whatever you've loved now is only a hint of what's to come. And the things that you know you'll never be able to do in this time in the earth, you don't have enough time. You will have all the time because your experience of space and time, because we will still be in space and time, only God is outside of those. But your experience of space and time will be doxological because no longer in a fallen world. Now time will be your servant, not your enemy that takes your life away. And space will be your servant. You can choose to be at a place and you are there. I do hope as well that I'll be able to zoom down to orders of magnitude and then zoom back out. What a ride that would be. And doing that with other people, doing that with other people, being able to see the world now after the judgment seat of Christ where no secrets are now needed. It's all been dealt with. For the first time, I can then see the world through the eyes of another. And then we can have a stereoscopic ideation where we see all things together, but from two different vantage points, all things created further up and further in. The possibilities are boundless and limitless, but most people haven't got the imagination to do it. I want you to be a person who develops your imagination and also your sensorium, and to look at the loveliness and the beauty, the invitations, the wonders of the natural world that we see now. What do you think it'll be like when a resurrected world, where it'll all be to the glory of God? That's going to be a wonderful world indeed. So we want to long for home. Father, we thank you that you've called us to such a holy longing, and you've invited us to pursue you and to allow you to woo us and to pursue us and to receive your grace and to then manifest that grace to others. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.